Starting, all attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone to Learning Ally's webinar titled Optimize Your Child's IEP Through Structured Collaboration with Dr. Vaughn Lauer. My name is Jules Johnson and I'm with Learning Ally, and I want to welcome you all to the webinar today. First, we're going to go over just a few housekeeping items, and we'll go ahead and change the slide now to the housekeeping items, and that way we can kind of let you know how the webinar platform works. So if you look over on the right-hand side of your screen, you're going to see a toolbar with a lot of different things on it. One thing you want to notice off the top is the orange or red arrow. You can use that to hide your control panel. So if you want to hide it to see more of the screen, just push that button and it'll go over to the right, and you push it again and it will come back. You can also choose how you want to listen today. You can listen through your computer, mic, and speakers. Or if you check telephone, then a phone number will pop up and you can call that number and you can actually listen to today's webinar through your telephone. You can also submit questions to us. Notice the question panel. It's down on the right-hand side of your screen. It says questions there. It's got a little plus mark. If you hit that, it will widen out, and you can type your questions in there, and we're going to have a chance at the end of this presentation for us to actually ask your questions to Dr. Lauer. So make sure to type those in as we go throughout. Also of note, today's presentation is being recorded, and it will be provided to you within a few days via email. Also, make sure to follow us at Learning Ally on Twitter and also Learning Ally on Facebook as well. We'll switch to the next slide. I want to tell you about another upcoming event, Spotlight on Dyslexia. This is coming up December 4th. It is a live online conference. Everything you would get in person is online. Really great conference. It's coming up December 4th from 9 to 5. If you can't make it that day, it's also recorded and available for 60 days afterwards. If you want more information on this conference, go to learningally.org/dyslexia conference. Really great conference there. I want to introduce today's speaker, so we'll go to the next slide, and I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Dr. Vaughn Lauer. You may have read his very popular book called When the School Says No, How to Get the Yes. Awesome book. We are in great hands today to learn how to optimize your child's IEP through structured collaboration. Dr. Lauer has 30 years of experience in pre-K through post-secondary as a teacher, professor, and also administrator. So lots of experience there. Great book, and I'm just so excited to get into the presentation and see what he has to offer. So Dr. Lauer, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, first thing I want to say is thank you, Jules, and thank you folks for sitting in and for the folks who will be listening to this at a later point. I know it's a busy time of the year. School has started, and I'm sure many of you have questions, and many of you are just making sure that what you're doing is absolutely correct, and I'm sure you are. The title, of course, is how do you optimize a child's IEP, and the key part here is through the structured collaborative process, and it's something I dubbed after having worked for decades in the field of special education and having sat in on literally thousands of IEP meetings and then audited even more to say there's got to be a better way to do this. And I kind of melted down all of the confusion that's in an IEP to 6 basic questions. And the best way to approach, I think, any IEP meeting is through a subtle approach, and that's avoiding yelling and screaming, because you're only going to get that back, and nobody likes that kind of a meeting. And I've seen where they've gone awry, and I've seen very, very good meetings. And again, I try to figure out what is it that makes it work and what doesn't. So we're talking about 6 key questions to ask during an IEP meeting. The structured part of it I'll hit in just a moment, but it's to guide you through step by step, and so that you don't end up in a meeting that starts at one point C, back to A, and then over to B and C, and then Z, and everything else you've got going for you. The book itself was written well, I'm not going to go through the detail there. It's just too long, but know that it was a parent's idea, and it was a good one. And she and I collaborated for a while, and then she became ill and had to step aside, and that's too bad. But we came up with this idea of helping parents in a way that would make sense, and that's what the book is about. So in order to make it make sense, I asked parents to submit to me their stories of IEP meetings, and from there we worked. I did the analysis of each of the IEP meeting against the 6 questions to say, here's how it was done well, here's what could have been done, and this is why it went horribly wrong or horribly right. And through those examples, it's a book of sensibility. For those who have purchased the book, I know you'll see a number of kids with autism. All you have to really do is replace the disability with any other disability and just focus on the process because it's effective in all 12 chapters, or it shows you where it was not effectively used. I want to start with a story about a little girl named Ariel who was in 3rd grade, who was struggling in reading, 3 years behind, several years in math, and her mom and I caught up as part of this book process, and she was explaining how Ariel was feeling, well, they're not part of the school system because of all the problems she was having with reading and math. And I think it's something we can all relate to. And Mom's struggling to understand the law and how to get the services that she knew that Ariel needed. And I worked with Mom, and I know she did everything correctly. She even approached it through the collaborative process, and no matter what she did, the school would say no, as bad as it was. And there are situations like this, not all, fortunately, but enough to make us take note, where even the advocate that Mother purchased services from was a friend of the special ed supervisor, and more so a friend than an advocate. And that didn't fare well for Mom or Ariel. So Mom is collecting, as we all would, the information to say, here's the problem, here's what I think we should do, and the school would continually say no. Since an advocate didn't work and her first approach didn't work, she reached out to attorneys, still watching her daughter, who now does not want to go to school. And it was hard for her to send her daughter to school to see an unhappy child as she had. But even the attorneys weren't interested in the case. Really, really sad situation. Mom did the only option she had left, because believe me, she did everything she could. She looked at her daughter, she looked at the school system and said, I've got to move. And she did. And she said, Vaughn, when I go to this next school system, I guess I've got 2 ways of looking at it. I can just give the information, or I can tell them how bad it was and that I didn't want that situation here. And I suggested that she keep in mind what we've been talking about for the last 6 months and just approach it with, here's my daughter's needs. This is what I would like as an outcome, and can we work together? So Mom's sitting there. This is a story she relays to me, with all the information from the previous school, and starts talking to the school staff, who say to her, well, excuse me, could you tell me more about the first thing you were talking about? I really didn't understand that. And she said, well, sure, I can tell you about that. Long story short, we have a little girl who was miserably unhappy in school, a mom who was frustrated to the end, who finds a school that says, yeah, I'm willing to work with you in a collaborative fashion, and did. Now, Ariel is just about on reading level, and 1 or 1.5 years behind in math, is no longer unhappy, loves going to school, and just the last year was at a talent show, of all things, from this meek, mild child to a happy kid who says, I belong here, life is good, and I like what I'm doing here in school. So you've got those extremes, and that's what I want to talk about today. How do you work with a school that's willing to work with you, and how do you work with a school that's not? And so let me start with asking you this first question. I know there are a lot of people out there who believe IEP meetings are based on negotiations, and that's the approach they want to take when they come into their first IEP meeting. But the question I ask them then is, which of your child's services are you willing to give up? Because in terms of understanding what negotiating means, it's I'm willing to do this if I can get this. And most parents will say, I don't want to give up any services. Then why don't we take a different approach and not negotiate, but look at it as if we could collaborate and accomplish the same thing, get the child's needs. And the worst thing that could happen is the school says, okay, we'll give you 50 hours of speech. What are you going to do when you only needed 1, when your child only needed 1? It's not where you want to be. So what if at IEP meetings, the members cooperated in a really collaborative way? We're going to talk about that briefly. And the focus of that meeting was only on your child's needs. Well, that's the goal in any meeting, or it should be. And you knew that achieving collaboration stems from simply asking 6 key questions. And right now you're saying, well, how can you ask questions and establish collaboration? And that's what I want to talk about today. Sorry, need a little water there. Well, let's look at the first word, collaboration. There's a difference between collaboration and structured collaboration. I'm going to bet that many of you have been in groups, whether it's work or workshops, and you're split up into small groups and you're told to go forth and collaborate. And you kind of look at each other and go, what am I supposed to do? Well, collaboration is a group of people who work together on the same concept or the same task. That part we've got figured out. But typically people then spend a lot of time figuring out, well, where do we begin? How do we collaborate? And I'm not even sure if we know if we have a finished product. But in the process of using structured collaboration, same basic understanding, we're working together, but everybody knows the steps we're going to take. It's very easy to implement, and I mean it's very easy, and practice. A question is posed and everybody has to reply. Nobody sits back there with their mouth closed. And even if they're not a specialist in reading, they can listen to what's being said and say, well, given what was said, this is my opinion, and thank you very much for asking. The questions themselves guide the team to the end of the product, and in our case, it's the IEP. So, structured collaboration is a method of collaboration that encourages people to think internally all the time because they know that they're going to have to give their opinion. So everybody's focused on the issue. We're not sitting there with one person speaking, everybody else with their head down, and the next person speaks, everybody with their head down, because we're going to ask, what do you think, and what is your basis of it? And we're not building, the second point of structured collaboration, we're not building an IEP in mass, we're taking it in small steps of agreement. And like any project, first step to maybe 1,000 steps, but if we do it in small steps and we agree, then it's much easier to build the IEP. Okay, that's the basic idea behind it. One way of looking at this, and I think this is the best, is if we consider the GPS system. When you first get your GPS system, whether it's on your phone or your watch, I guess, at this point, you can say, I want to go visit Vaughn in D.C. Now, why you want to come down here and visit me, I don't know. I don't cook, so there's really no reason to come here except great conversation, maybe. But you can punch in Washington, D.C. all you want, and it's going to sit there. And it's going to sit there and sit there because it doesn't know what. It doesn't know where it is. And because it doesn't know where it is, it can't tell you how to get to where you want to go. So in a GPS system and in an IEP system, we start with the questions of what do we know, what don't we know? And that's our first question, what do we know? And once that GPS system knows where it is, it can start to give us other information. And then the GPS system might say to us, okay, now that I know where we are, and you can tell me where you want to go, which is the second part of writing an IEP. I write them in terms of goals. And you punch in whatever address that you want in DC, and it says, okay, would you like to know how close we're getting to get there? And you would say, yeah, I really would. And you would in an IEP too. I want to know how close to achieving those goals I am. And you get those back through periodic reports. The GPS will do the same thing by saying you've got, I don't know, 15 minutes to go or 2 miles to go or something similar to that. The GPS might say, well, okay, I can give you that information. I can give you, maybe we need to move around from our original plan because we didn't accomplish what we wanted to. As I said, I can tell you if you want how close we're getting there. And in fact, skipping ahead, I can even tell you when we've arrived. I'll say, we have arrived. Would you like that? Yes, I would. So an IEP is really similar to a GPS system in that I can't get from here to there if I don't know where here is. And it's that first question of what do I know, compounded by what don't I know, that's going to help me decide how to write the rest of the IEP. Now I have to spend a little time on behaviors and that word data, but all data means is information, so don't let it throw you. When we're talking about knowing where we are, we're talking about the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. And we need to have those in terms that we can understand. And this is one of the ways of asking the questions at the school. If you're thinking about, well, the teacher just said they have a decoding problem, and I'm not sure what a decoding problem is, then you're going to ask them, could you restate that for me so that I can visualize what you're talking about? That's information. And they're going to state it in a way that says, well, when I give your daughter this piece of information, look, here's what I'm giving her. Okay, great. This is what I expect of her. Okay, wonderful. But this is what I get. Oh, okay. That's all part of what do we know, okay? And if you ask a question, and I am jumping ahead because I'm cognizant of the time, but if you say, oh, I just lost my train of thought. Whoops, I have to admit I have ADHD and I will lose my train of thought, and not too often, I hope. I'll come back to it, hopefully. All right, so the point is, if you can't see it, you can't measure it, you don't know what it is, and you're always asking for questions of understanding. That's the subtle part of getting through this process. It's not difficult. It doesn't upset anybody if you're polite about asking what you want to know. You're not saying, well, show it to me. I've never seen this before. That's not the approach. And I know most of you don't do that. I really do. But it's still nice to know, well, how do I ask that question? And please understand that without having that basic information to know where I am, what we know about my child, I cannot build that IEP. And what I might build without it is something that's going to be totally useless. Well, let's look a little bit more about behaviors, and they have to be describable, observable, and measurable. If they're not all three of these, then they're not a behavior. We're going to talk about this briefly as well. Let's take a look at some words that I put under the heading of describable. And if you look at them quickly, it's inattentive, poor reading, sloppy handwriting, and so forth. But I'm going to ask you this. If I'm going to measure these by counting them, can I count 1 inattentive behavior, 2 inattentive behaviors, 3? I can't. These are not describable. They're, in fact, indescribable because they don't show us in our minds what somebody else is picturing. Doing well in math is meaningless to me. Explain what that means. Show me samples. Great. This is going to help me write the IEP for my child. In addition to the work, the behavior that I'm looking for, I want to know under the conditions in which that behavior occurs. And I know many of you have seen similar wording like this, but I want to accentuate a couple of things. You want to know what happens before that behavior. And when I think of behaviors, I think of behaviors that are academic, social behaviors, motoric behaviors. They're all behaviors because I can observe them and count them. So don't confuse that I'm thinking just social behaviors. I'm not. But you want to know what's happening beforehand. You want to know that maybe the child is supposed to get materials out before they conduct the math steps, whatever they're doing, and that's important information. You want to know when the behavior occurs, when the child is able, let's say, to add in single digits, and when she's not able to do that. The same behavior, but when is she unable to do that? And the other thing is you want to know what happens after that behavior is observed. You really want to know all of these things, and you'll look at them in different ways. But it's not enough to say, well, she can't add single-digit numbers. Well, wait a minute. Again, what does that look like? And are you doing that on the board? Are you doing it on a projector? Are you doing it on an iPad? How are you doing that? And that's part of what happens before to help explain to you what that behavior is when it happens. And then the measures. And I know we're kind of talking about goals because if you have good and well-written present levels of performance, then writing a goal is a very easy task. You just change a few words. What you want to know how often that behavior occurs. How often does she add correctly 1 digits to a total of 10? Is that once in a while? Well, that's not very helpful. Is it 9 out of 10 trials? And you might want to know how long it takes for her to complete those maybe 10 problems. Is it 5 minutes, 3 minutes, or 2? And then there's something called intensity. And that would be like my describing, oh, my son just had a meltdown today. Every one of us will picture something different of a meltdown, or my spouse had a meltdown, that's not sufficient. We want to say, okay, this is what the meltdown looked like. So whether it's a social behavior or an academic behavior, I still want to be able to visualize that. I want to know what it looks like, when it occurs, and the frequency or intensity or the duration. Now, we say we want to look at words that are describable. We can say looking out the window. Well, that's far more informative than it is not paying attention. Is it observable? Yes. I see it during group math instruction. So that leads us to believe we're not going to see it on individual instruction. And measurable during the whole class instruction, or is it, or during class instruction, you'll be able to count the number of times the child looks out the window. It's very easy to measure. And so that means if we can do it this way, that when we're talking about reporting progress, we can report progress in the same way too, because you know what we're talking about. We're talking about his looking out the window. You know it's only in math. There's a reason here someplace, but this is information. And we know that we can count the number of times. Easy to accomplish and very informative. So whatever we provide as an intervention, we can measure the change by the behavior, when it occurs, how often in this case, what it looks like, and we'll be able to measure the number of times that the child's off task. One more drink, and really it's only water. There are two kinds of data out there, in my opinion. One is fluff, and the other is stuff. Fluff data things that sound good, but don't help us a whole heck of a lot. Stuff are more numerics. They are describable. They meet the criteria we just presented. We know what the behavior is. We know what it is we're talking about. We know under what conditions, and so forth. I'm going to give you an example of fluff data that I think shows up way too often, and here's one of those things you're going to want to watch out for when you're sitting in on meetings to talk about data. The issue here isn't that we're talking about the Woodcock reading mastery test. The issue is the scores that are reported, and these scores are reported as grade equivalents. And I'm going to tell you straight up front, grade equivalents are not the same thing as grade level. They're not the same. They're totally different. The manner and calculation of what they represent is totally different, and I'm going to explain that in a little bit too. If you see a report that talks about grade equivalents, there's your red flag. And this is, I'm hoping somebody out there is going, aha, always wondered what that really meant. Now let me explain what it really means. Let's take a look at the numbers 1 through 10. Mary knows the numbers 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9, while Hector knows the numbers. The thing is they both have the same raw score. When you're figuring grade equivalence, it's that raw score that's put into a calculation that determines the grade equivalency. So in this case, and I've made this up, but the raw score of 5 is a grade equivalency of 2.7. Well, what we're saying is Mary and Hector have the same grade equivalency. What you already know is it doesn't mean the same thing, but it's often misinterpreted as grade level. I even had an ongoing argument with an advocate who said, well, it may be confusing, but it's easy for parents to understand. My suggestion to him was not to use it because it creates more problems than not. Most very knowledgeable psychologists and others who provide assessments don't give grade equivalency. I'm just saying it's not going to help you, and comparing one grade equivalency measure in 3rd grade and comparing it to 4th grade is not going to help you because it doesn't show what skills were learned. It's fluff. It looks good, feels good. Hey, I can understand grade equivalency. Not so much. Well, there are other scores that look a little more frightening, but they're far more useful. Grade equivalency on the right we talked about. On the left we're looking at something called standard scores, and they're all over the place. They range from 28 to 120. Right now they don't mean a whole lot, but if I look at the bell curve, normal distribution of scores, and I look at where 120 falls, it's between 115 and 130, now that has a lot more meaning to me if I know that this is the average score than it would be to say anything else. Having this chart is really helpful to me. We saw on the previous page where writing letters and words from dictation was a score of 28. That seems low, and if we follow the cursor, it is very low. Most children at that particular age and grade are performing much better than this particular child was. This, pictorially, starts to give me an idea of what the skills look like. I can even go a step further, and I can look at another bell curve, and you'll see test scores. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this today, but you'll see test scores in the reports that talk about standard deviations on the far left. They'll talk about percentile. They'll talk about Z-scores, sometimes T-scores, and other scores that really don't mean a whole lot when you hear them. But if you have a chart like this, and I'm going to send you one, then the data become more meaningful to you. One little quick thing I want to show you that percentile does not mean percent. And I know a lot of folks see that their child is in the 25th percentile. Very quickly, this area here is average. And so this percentile 25 seems like a very low score, but if you go straight up, you see that it's not so low, that a great percentage of the population scores within this area. If you also note the distance between 40 and 50 and 40 and 30, they're the same in 30 and 20, but the distance between 20 and 10 and 5 are not. That's why they get a little confusing on explaining what percentile means by just hearing it, but by looking at the chart you can say, okay, 12th percentile, I see, we're here. And the same thing with normal Z-scores and T-scores. They're different measures, but just having this chart helps you figure out where the child falls in this bell curve. Much more helpful. All righty, first question, what do we know? And as I said earlier, or not know. And if we don't know something, we have to assess it. These are things that are told, for example, and I picked this up on a variety of places, IEP meetings and reports, does not read on grade level, struggles with phonics, comprehension problems, doesn't know, so on and so forth. Not very helpful, and not examples that help us understand the area of need. We don't settle for this. And if we see it, and that's what's presented to us, we say, again, I'm not a reading specialist, but I'm really interested in understanding. Plus, I have to take this home to my significant other, and you know they don't understand stuff. So help me out understand what this means grade level. And we expect to get this kind of information, something that's very useful that we can picture in our mind. And I'm just going to head down to the bottom one that says, given the 5th grade reading material, okay, I know what level, of 250 words, great. It's a number of words, can read and answer fact-based questions and sequence events. Okay, I think I got that, but can't state the main idea. Oh, okay. I can kind of figure out what that is. I might ask a question or I might not need to, but it sure is better than can't answer questions about what she read. And this in the yellow is what we're looking for. So when we have that, we have identified the present levels of performance. And we stated that given that particular level of those many words, child can read but cannot state a main idea. Okay, great. Right now we can assume never able to state main idea because there was no other indication. So we're going to start with 0, but over time we're hoping to see progress. Back to the question, what don't we know? What we don't know we assess. And supposing you ask that question of, well, I know the test said that, but could you explain what that means? And the person says, you know, I don't know that I have enough information to really answer your question, which is a good one. And you can say, well, is there a way to figure out how to do that? Could we assess that? And the answer would typically be yes. So you're all ready to ask the questions. If it doesn't make sense to you, that's the heart of this. You're going to ask for further explanation. And for the answer that doesn't exist, we are able to assess it. Okay, so the next step is, now that I've defined what it is, I know where is, where do I want to go next? Well, and I'm going to do that by building goals. I have a target in mind based on the present levels of performance, and this is the second question. Do not start an IEP meeting with, well, I want this done, I want this accomplished, I want this accomplished, because if you don't know the answer to the first part, where is my child, this is going to be meaningless to you. You're not even going to know what a fair expectation might be. Again, non-examples. here's a goal, pass state assessments. These are real ones, I've seen them. Will increase ability to understand and respond to literature from various genres and geocultural groups. What? Okay, I still don't know what that means, but it was real. When we look at real examples in writing a goal, and we look at the yellow one, we're saying, hey, that looks a lot like it does. It looks a lot like the needs that we established under the present levels of performance. And it should. And it should. And we're saying that the child was getting no main ideas correctly, and now we're looking at 100%. Okay, this makes totally good sense to me. I follow this without a doubt. So we have the present levels of performance. We now have a goal statement. They look similar, and they should. And we know we're on our way to writing a good IEP. Excuse me. Now the next question is, how are we going to achieve those goals? Well, in any structure that's being built, we need particular tools to accomplish something, and other tools are not going to help us, and we have to decide what is it that we need. We're talking about things like special education services. Maybe it's math for an hour a day. Maybe it is speech and language, 2 times 30 minutes a day is going to help me achieve that goal. Maybe it is the setting for the service, and a smaller, quieter area is going to help me. What I'm saying is what you list as the services, special education, related services, accommodations, assistive technology, and so forth, have to address the goal. This is not the time to say, well, this would be nice, I'd like to put this in, or this would be nice, I'd like to put this in. There better be a real relationship to what the child needs. It's also the point where if the school says, no, we don't want to provide, we think we can do that service without, we think we can meet that goal without providing a special service. And you say, okay, let me understand something, the subtle part. We agreed, we talked about this and we agreed. We all went around the table and said, yep, this was a need. Then we write a goal that said, this is how we meet the need, but you're not providing a service that you know will address this goal to help achieve the change. Do I have that right, or did you misspeak, or did I misunderstand something? Oh, well, yeah. And then you have the discussion, well, how are we going to meet this need if we don't provide this particular service? And you go around the room and you ask each person for their opinion in a gentle way. Next question is, how will we get there? Well, I mean, it's the same question, but it'll look the same here. We're talking about what I just said, services and accommodations, any on the left. We're also speaking about the setting and LRE. We do not talk about needed services and accommodations before we have identified the child's problems or the goal we want to reach, because these have to match that need. We don't talk about where the services are being provided yet. We want to reach an agreement that these are the child's needs. This is the goal to achieve it. I know I'm being repetitive, but I'm doing it for a reason. And these are the services that match those needs. Don't jump around. And I've been in IEP meetings where we start with settings for services and like, whoa, wait a minute. And if that happens, you say, excuse me. I know that's important to talk about, but could we just back up first and help me, here we go again, understand why his needs first, and then we can talk about where the services would be provided, but we need to come back here and work our way there. Could we do that, please? I think you'll find a lot of people being a lot more gracious and responding to you than not. Now, here comes a part that's been annoying me for years, and it started with No Child Left Behind, and I'm not blaming legislators, I'm not blaming anybody else other than this was put into place before people gave it full thought. And I think we're also experiencing this being in place with people not giving full thought to kids with disabilities. But when we answer the question, how are we getting there, grades are not the answer. Unless grades were written in as a goal statement, child will receive a B or better. Because these are not goal statements where it says reading. It doesn't help me at all. If reading was word or remembering or sorry, if reading was figuring out the main idea, this certainly doesn't explain it. And that's the problem. These are not goal related. Oftentimes this is what people get. And I'm saying to parents and schools, wait, the law says that you're going to provide to me the information so I know that my child is or isn't making progress on the goals we wrote. And we've spent a lot of time in writing the behaviors and the frequency or whatever it might be. I would like to have a report that goes back to those goals and explains to me the progress on each of those. So I'm saying if this is what a school is saying is the answer, for the most part, they're wrong. And I'm sure there are a lot of you out there nodding your head. So in knowing where we're getting, there are means we need to know. We need to, excuse me, we need to be able to show what I just said about showing the measure of the behavior, to show change over time, whether it's frequency or duration. And again, grades just don't do that. When progress is reported, you want to ask at that meeting, what is it going to look like? There's no sense in waiting for the first, well, let's say period, to get a report card with letter grades and say, well, that's not right. This is the time to say, what will it look like to me? And if they say, well, we report grades in A, B's, and C's, and say, okay, that's fine, but we're supposed to be sharing with me how the child is progressing against these very specific goals. How will I know how he's doing with picking out the main idea? You need to get the information, you need to get from them information that is understandable and clearly defined in behavioral measurable terms, which is why we spend all this time figuring out present levels of performance and goals on the progress reports. And you also want to know who's responsible for each part of the plan. We're not looking for names per se, but we're looking for a special education teacher, general education teacher, a related service position, whatever it might be, so that we know in advance who it is that's responsible and who we might need to speak with. Well, again, when I look at non-examples, I look at passing, making progress, satisfactory, C, not introduced, acceptable. I know there are folks out there nodding their heads going, oh my gosh, this is what I get. It's no wonder it's difficult to write an annual review if this is the kind of information you're getting. Real examples are, and we'll go to the bottom one, states main idea of a 5th grade passage of 250 words with 89% accuracy. Well, when he started out with 0, we are making progress. Easy to understand, and I can say, okay, fine. We're moving forward. The IEP is accomplishing what it needs to. What it looks like in the IEP will be very similar to this. We've done around present levels of performance, the goals, and the progress reports. And they'll look like this. Main idea, 89% after reading 250 words. Then it'll be, and I've cut the wording down to main idea with 87%. Okay, it fluctuated. 3rd quarter idea with 100% accuracy. I have a running tally of what's going on. I have a really good idea how well my child's doing in school. You need to know that. So do the school personnel. Why? Because you're going to take that information, and if you've established goals, you're going to know when you've achieved them and what you're going to do next. And you're going to say, well, what do I want? What skills do I want kept? Because some skills are ones that you want to maintain for a very long time, newly learned skills. And you're also going to ask this last question, in addition to how do I keep what I have through maintenance, where do we go from here? Well, at the end of the year, you have an annual review. And that annual review can be really easy to put together if the IEP for the previous year was put together as I'm talking about now. If it's based on observable data, and if the goal statement is related directly to those data, and if the progress reports show progress against those goals in measurable behavioral terms. Because when it comes time to write the IEP, you essentially have a lot of the answers to the first question of what do we know? Wow, I believe that's what the creators of Public Law 94-142 had in mind way back in the mid-70s, is that this IEP wasn't just a piece of paper, but it was also a useful document that I could use in reporting progress and developing a plan, reporting progress, and then using those data for writing the next IEP. So, in summary, not bad on time, the focus is always on your child's needs. And sometimes you're going to run across, I don't know, let's say an administrator who has another agenda because she or he was told there are too many children in special education. I don't care. The focus is supposed to be on your child's needs, not the fiscal issues of the school. We also need to know that data and behaviors are key to understanding from the beginning what our needs are and how to write an IEP. And if you don't have those things, you ask to have them assessed. And then we know that by using the 6 questions and the answers to those questions, we actually develop the IEP. So before I go on to the next slide, I want you to think about sitting in an IEP meeting where you have a reading teacher and yourself and a general education teacher of that grade level, and let's say maybe it's the PE teacher, and you're wondering why is the PE teacher here, and the PE teacher might be wondering why too. But you start with looking at the data that are, let's throw a psychologist into, a school psychologist who's giving a report. And we're sitting around the table and the psychologist says, so therefore I think this. And you say, okay, and you're basing your conclusion on what again? And the person will repeat the information that you gleaned from the test. And you go around and you say, okay, Mr. PE teacher, does that make sense to you? The PE teacher says, well, I don't know your child, but given the information that was presented, it does make sense to me. And you go to the next person, then the next person. And what you're trying to avoid is having one person make all the decisions. I've sat in way too many IEP meetings, even recently, where the school psychologist does all the talking and people just sit there. That's not right. That's not what was intended in the law. And it means that you're not working collaboratively. You're just listening. It's not effective. And those other people sitting there have great ideas. It also will avoid when a district office person comes in and silence the group, says, I'll do all the talking. That's not what the law says. And so you do it in a polite way because you want to know. I want to know what that PE teacher thinks because they see, maybe even my child is in his PE class. I want to know what he thinks or she thinks. And I want group opinion. So I'm going to ask everybody. Now everybody knows you're going to ask these questions. Oh, here comes Lauer again. He's got those 6 questions. Well, come to think of it, they're not such bad questions, so maybe we should get the answers. That's all you're after. And it is easy to do. Now, I have to throw out a caution. There's always a caution to someplace. You don't always get what you want, and that goes with the song, and if we had audio, you'd be hearing it now. But what you should get is what your child needs. In order to do it right, you have to ask questions and not be afraid to ask those questions because you're asking them to understand them. And if your significant other isn't there, then that's your excuse. If it's just because you're not clear and you don't understand, that's your excuse. But ask the questions because you want to understand. They'll pick up and say, well, you're sincere. Well, all right, let's give you a good answer. They want to start with. Before I close out, I want you to imagine something if you can. Let me see. I seem to be missing a slide. But I want you to imagine something and think about whether you see this. When you have your IEP meetings, do you have meetings that are totally collaborative in nature, where everyone does participate and all make part of that decision? Not an individual, but everybody at that meeting. Can you imagine an IEP meeting where your child's needs was the whole focus, not a child with similar needs last year, or not what the configuration of the school was or will be next year, but the focus is on your child? Can you imagine where evaluation reports were understandable and useful? So you could apply them, you would understand them and say, okay, I get it. Now I know why my child has that particular disability, or now I understand why that. Is that happening? Do you have meetings where the IEP is actually developed around your child's needs? The whole IEP. Or where progress reports were clearly stated to the point where you knew exactly what gains your child was making. Honestly, I don't know that there's a yes for every one of those, but if you said no to any one of those, I'd like you to visit my website. I've got a number of things there that might help you, and they're free. This is free stuff to you. I've posted blogs that can give you information that you can use immediately in IEP meetings. Some that'll help you out understand test data. Others in the process, some are regulations. I also provide services to parents where I'll do the analysis of the IEP and the evaluations to determine pretty much what we were talking about here. Is there alignment from the present levels of performance through the goals, the services, and related services, right through AT and accommodations? I even provide an online training for the regulations of IDEA and 504 in case you want to feel more comfortable when you go into an IEP meeting. And I even have information on training workshops to help parents get the yes. And speaking of getting the yes, I'm going to give away 10 books just to you folks. And all I ask is that you visit the link on the slide that you see. And I know it looks long, but let me say what I want you to do if you're interested. If you'll pop over to that page and drop a comment there that tells me what the biggest issue you have seen in IEP meetings is, or what you think the biggest problem with IEP meetings at all, or the processes are, I would really appreciate that. And I'm going to keep this open for just a couple days till October 4th. And for those people who have signed up, I have a system that will randomly select 10 names, and I'll send 10 books to those individuals, and I'll even sign it. That'll increase the value right there. So all I'm asking is stop in. IEPhelp.com is my website. 2015 is just the year. 09 is the month. Free is a good word. Hyphen books. Drop there, leave a comment, and I'll get you back. If your name is selected, I'll send you a book. Lastly, because you took the time to sit in with me for this period of time, I've created, and I debated on this, but I just think it's worthwhile for you. I created a special package of materials, including a poster of the 6 key questions that have a brief explanation that you can post on, hey, your refrigerator, or take into an IEP meeting, just to have as a reminder. I've got videos on issues like collaboration and mediation and why they're different and why they're ineffective. And next week, I'll send out a very short email with a link to you. And if you're interested, you can go to that link and pick up that package that I've created just for you folks. So do me a favor, come next week, look for an email that in the subject line it says getting the yes. That's not a solicitation from some bad people. It is me, and I'm asking you, if you're interested in learning more about how to get the yes for your child, just follow that link back to the additional information. And you may find some other things there too. Feel free to drop me a comment. I will reply. And I want to close by asking you what questions you might have. And I think I've done well. We've got about 15 minutes to answer those questions.
You've done great, Vaughn. This is Jules again. We're getting a lot of questions, and one particular question has a very, very similar theme that I'm seeing several people asking. They're saying that their school has said to them, we don't get that specific with goals when they've tried to bring specific goals to the table. And a lot of people are asking, how do you collaborate when your school straight out tells you we don't get that specific? What would be your response?
Well, I would say to the school, well, explain to me how you're going to measure, and I want to see, explain to me how you're going to measure progress and what format is that progress report going to look like. Maybe you're onto something, but help me do that. Help me understand that. I don't think they can. And if they give you another vague statement, you say, okay, I'm not sure what that means. Can you explain that further? And if they have to explain it, you say, okay, see what happens? Even you need to explain this further. Why couldn't we write the goal that looked like this? And it's always, your question goes back to, why can't you, it's kind of like, why can't you fix it? So that's my quick answer to it. You turn it back, but you're saying, well, I would be repeating myself. Am I close?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. We got another question here from a parent who says her child has dyslexia, but her child is being denied any services because the school is saying her child's on grade level. How should she proceed?
Yes, always a good question. In the and she's not the only one, but in the regulations, there is a statement, and then there was also a letter sent out by our current director of the Office of Special Education Programs, Melody Musgrove, that said, even in that, and I'm paraphrasing it. You know what? I'll make sure that I'll get. Let me just remind me of that question, because then what I'll do is I'll make sure that's one of the things that come out when I send out the information. But there's a regulation that says that even if children are passing, that they can't be denied services. They can't be denied special education recognition or services. And it's that regulation that you need to have. I'll put that regulation in, and then I'll attach to it the letter from Melody. And it addresses exactly what you're looking for, and that's what you have to go back to the school and say. I know what happens out there, and our 2E children fall prey to this so often that they're able to compensate and effectively do well in spite of their disability. But the key here is to show that, yes, the child has a disability, and because that child has a disability, then the services need to be provided. So just by passing coursework, the regulations say that is not sufficient for deferring and saying the child does not qualify. And I think having that particular set of regulations, small phrase, got to know where to find it, and you will, and having Melody's letter is their starting point. And then you go back through this process. They'll tell me exactly where my child is. And remember that bell curve? See here? The test scores are low here and high here. This indicates a disability to me. How are you addressing it? And that's how you come back in through the system. And I hate to do that so quickly, but that's the idea behind it.
We're getting a lot of questions on measurements and measuring progress, and specifically some people have said, what if their school cannot answer the question of where my child stands with words per minute, etc.? What do the school, if they tell the parent we can't answer that question, we don't know where they stand in words per minute?
Yeah. Well, the question is, so who can do this? And if the school is saying we're not equipped to do that, then you have the right to request an independent educational evaluation. And that's why that idea came from to start with. If the schools aren't capable or aren't able or don't have the staff to do it, you may request to have your child assessed outside of the school system. Now, keep in mind that once you do that, the school has two options. One is to pay for an outside individual to conduct the evaluation, and the other is to bring a lawsuit or due process against you, the parent, to show that what they have is substantial enough to make whatever decision they're making. The fact that you have recorded in one way or another, we all know to keep records of everything, that the school says they don't have the ability to do it, validates the need for an independent educational evaluation. So if you're in that meeting, the school says that, you're writing it down, you say, oh, okay, you're saying you don't have anybody here or know how to evaluate for those scores, am I correct? Yes. Okay. And you've got it quoted, and you come back then requesting an independent educational evaluation.
Our next question we have, we're asking, I have a current IEP and I have realized that it's got a lot of problems after watching your presentation. How do I get the school to start over?
My question would be to you, to anybody, where have you and the school agreed? And those components are where you start. And not knowing the details, this is another benefit of going through the steps and process, because often the schools will agree that these are the needs, but it breaks down in terms of writing goals and services. So if you need an advocate or later down an attorney you can explain to them, well, we agreed here and here and here, but we disagreed here. And the advocate says, okay, we'll pick up from here. So, or an attorney says, wait, you got them to agree on the needs? Uh-huh. And the goals? Yeah. But they refuse the services? Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. It makes their life much easier for you. So I would start, and you can contact me if you want to discuss it further, but I would start with where you do agree and then build around that, going back to the original first question, what do we know, and looking for the present levels of performance, and say, okay, you know, we've gone through this. We seem to have some disagreements, but I think we agree with this part. Am I correct? Or there's some other parts further down, you know, the services and the time and the blah, blah, blah. But could we go back here and make sure we agree? And how could we talk about this other issue again? And you bring them through that loop. That's the best approach. Not having any more details, that's how I would do it. Start with where you've agreed. That's a real plus in having a conversation in a collaborative fashion.
We have another question here. What happens if it comes around time for the IEP again and my child has not made progress or not made sufficient progress? What should I do?
Well, hopefully you were, well, we don't know. Let's assume that you were made aware of one set of data, but when it comes down to the end of the year, you got an entirely different results. You say, wait a minute, I don't understand. We're making progress here, here, and here, and now you're saying it's not. Without knowing what the measures were or what the progress reports said, I can't give a very specific answer. Well, let me think. Could you repeat? I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, they wanted to know if they've written these goals, but then they come back around the time for the next IEP meeting and their child has not made progress or sufficient progress.
Right. Determining what is sufficient. I'm making the assumption, and we all are, that when a goal is written, that it's a reasonable expectation that the child's going to achieve that they're not just throwing it out, or it's not a curricular goal, and we say, oh, 80% is what we do for everybody. But it's essential that you not make a decision at the end of the year that says this was not effective. You should be on it from the very beginning. The only way you're going to know from the first marking period, second and third, is if the IEP was written correctly, so that you could say, hey, oh, this is 2 marking periods in a row and we're not making progress. I think we need to have another IEP meeting. So in general, folks, you've got to monitor progress. It's got to be written in a format that's going to be understandable to you, so that you can go back to the school and say, we are making progress and we're not. And you have to monitor it and break in early to say, this is not effective. I don't know what reports were given to this particular parent. That would be important to know. And it's about the best I can give as an answer here. You need to monitor, and if it's not happening, walk in and request an IEP meeting to make that determination. But if the goals are written in a very poorly constructed fashion, you're kind of in a weak spot to make any demands.
The next question we have, can a parent respectfully decline services that a school wants to provide? The family wants an outside tutor to provide the services, but the school says they are legally required to provide the services. Is this the law?
2 things. You can decline to have any of the IEP suggestions or offerings accepted. So you can approve some parts and not others. That is legal. That was new just a few years ago, decade ago, I guess at this point. The other is that the school is under the obligation to provide the services, and they're going to take the position that we have to provide them, that we're not going to pay for outside services unless we can't provide those services, much like the earlier question. You know, we can't do it, okay, then you're going to pay for somebody else to do it. Whether they actually have the services that you're seeking, whether they're the right services or qualitatively good services is another question, but unless you say that the progress isn't being achieved as it should be, you don't have a position to say, I want you to pay for this, when the school says, but we have that service available.
And we have time for just one more question here. Can you say a little bit more about grade level versus grade equivalent? I know you said they're not equal.
Yeah, grade level is a measure of skills that would be expected to be achieved at a particular age or grade. 4.5, fifth years, 4.5 would be fourth year, fifth month. They're skill-based. Grade equivalent, as I pointed out, was just the number correct. And if you were to delve into an assessment that gave you grade equivalency, you might find that the child has, I'll do math because it's the easiest for me, but can do some simple addition, some simple subtraction, no multiplication, but for some unknown reason got a division problem right. It's irrespective of what was correct, the number that they got right is the determinant for a grade equivalency. A grade level says, look, fourth graders in the fifth month should be able to decode these words, should be able to comprehend, should be able to cite back, sequence of events, should be able to pick the main idea, those sort of things. And if you look into the test, I can say to you, here are the skills your child has, here are the ones he does not. That's the difference. I hope that was clearer. I have an article on the difference between the two on my website too, and I'll make a note to post that so that people can look at it.
Great. And we'll go ahead and switch to that last slide. And Vaughn, it was an excellent webinar. Thank you so much for everything you told us here. It was fabulous. I want to invite everyone. I know there was still a lot of questions on here, so I want to invite everyone, if you will go to facebook.com/groups/Learning Ally Parent Chat, Learning Ally Parent Chat. We're all in there. We're happy to answer your questions. Vaughn Lauer is actually in there as well, so we can all answer some of those questions that you did not get answered here today also. But here's all of our information. If you would like more information from anything that Vaughn gave today, we will have a follow-up email with the recordings and the handouts. You can also go to his website, iephelp.com, or you can log on to learningally.org. There's all of our emails and other information to follow up. So thank you all, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks again.